Hello, everyone. There are moments when everything around you seems calm, but your mind refuses to follow that quiet. Nothing is particularly wrong, nothing urgent is happening, and yet, something inside you keeps moving, keeps speaking, keeps pulling your attention in every direction at once. You sit down, maybe after a long day, maybe in a place that should feel safe and familiar, and for a brief second, it almost feels like you can finally rest. But then, without warning, a thought appears. It doesn't arrive loudly, it doesn't demand your attention. It simply shows up quietly, almost gently, as if it belongs there. At first it feels small, something you can easily ignore. Maybe it's about something that happened earlier in the day, a conversation you replay in your mind, a sentence you wish you had said differently. You don't mean to focus on it, but somehow you do. And then another thought follows. Then another. Before you realize it, the silence you were hoping for is gone. Not because the world became louder, but because your mind did. And the strange thing is, you know this feeling. You've experienced it before, not once, not twice, but many times. Moments when you wanted to rest, but couldn't. Moments when your body was still, but your thoughts kept moving. It's not dramatic. It's not overwhelming in a way that others can easily see. But it's there, a constant, quiet noise that never fully disappears. You try to distract yourself. You reach for your phone. You play something in the background. You give your attention to anything that might fill the space. And for a moment, it works. The thoughts become softer, less noticeable, pushed somewhere behind everything else. But they don't go away. They wait. And the moment things become quiet again, they return. Sometimes stronger than before, sometimes faster, as if they've been gathering while you weren't looking. You begin to wonder why. Why does your mind refuse to stay quiet even when nothing is wrong? Why does it keep searching, analyzing, replaying, imagining, even when you just want a moment of peace? You don't always have an answer. And maybe that's what makes it harder. Because when something has a clear cause, it feels easier to manage. But this feels different. It doesn't come from one place. It comes from everywhere. From the past, from the future, from things that happened and things that haven't even happened yet. Your mind moves between them without asking permission. It revisits old moments. It imagines new ones. It creates scenarios that may never exist and reacts to them as if they're real. And through all of this, you remain in the middle, trying to follow, trying to understand, trying to slow it down. But the more you try to control it, the more it seems to move. And that's when the question begins to form. A quiet, almost tired question. Why can't I just be calm? Not perfectly calm. Not completely free of thoughts. Just calm enough. Calm enough to sit in silence without feeling uncomfortable. Calm enough to exist in the moment without being pulled away from it. But that kind of calm feels distant. Like something you've experienced before but can't quite reach anymore. And the more you try to reach it, the further it seems to move. So you sit there, in a quiet place, with a mind that refuses to be quiet, and a feeling that something is missing, even though everything seems fine. The question doesn't disappear after it appears. It stays with you, quietly, almost patiently, as if it knows you will eventually come back to it. At first, you try to move past it. You tell yourself that it's normal, that everyone feels this way sometimes, that maybe you're just tired or overthinking. And for a while, that explanation seems enough. But the feeling doesn't completely fade. It lingers somewhere beneath your thoughts, waiting for a moment when everything becomes quiet again. And when that moment comes, the same restlessness returns. Not loudly, not aggressively, but persistently, like a gentle pressure that never fully leaves. You begin to notice a pattern. It doesn't only happen at night. It doesn't only happen when you're alone. It can appear in the middle of a normal day, in the middle of a conversation, even in moments that are supposed to feel light and easy. A thought interrupts you. Another thought follows. And suddenly your attention is no longer where you are. It has already moved somewhere else. You start to realize that the problem is not the silence around you. The problem is the movement inside you. Your mind is always doing something, always searching, always connecting, always trying to make sense of things. It looks for meaning. It looks for patterns. It looks for answers, even when there are no questions being asked. And because of that, it rarely rests. Even when you don't need it to work, it continues to move. Even when there is nothing urgent, it continues to create. You begin to wonder if this is just how it is. If this constant movement is something you have to live with. If peace is something that only exists in short moments. Never lasting, never fully reachable. But then something else begins to form. A quieter observation, one that doesn't come from frustration, but from curiosity. You start to notice not just the thoughts themselves, but how they appear. You notice that you don't actually choose them. They arrive on their own. A memory appears. A worry follows. An imagined situation begins to unfold. And before you can stop it, you are already inside it. Thinking about it, feeling something because of it, reacting to something that isn't even happening right now. And that's when something shifts slightly. You begin to see that your thoughts are not always under your control, not in the way you once believed. They don't always respond to your intention. They don't always follow your direction. They simply appear. And once they appear, they pull you in. But here is something even more important. You don't always have to follow them. At first, this idea feels unfamiliar, because for a long time, you may have believed that every thought needs attention, that every thought needs to be understood, analyzed, or solved, that if something appears in your mind, it must mean something important. But what if that's not entirely true? What if some thoughts are simply passing through? What if they don't need to be followed? What if they don't need to be completed? You begin to observe more carefully. A thought appears. Instead of reacting immediately, you notice it. You see how quickly it tries to take your attention. You see how easily it can grow if you give it space. But you also begin to see something else. If you don't follow it, it doesn't stay the same way. It doesn't grow. It doesn't become heavier. It simply changes or fades. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. And in that moment, something becomes clearer. Maybe the noise in your mind is not coming from the thoughts themselves. Maybe it comes from the way you hold on to them, from the way you follow them without noticing, from the way you treat every thought as something that must be completed. And if that's true, then something else might also be true. Peace might not come from stopping your thoughts. It might come from changing your relationship with them. This idea feels subtle, almost too simple, because for so long you may have been trying to fix something, trying to quiet something, trying to control something that doesn't fully respond to control. But what if control is not the answer? What if awareness is? What if the moment you notice your thoughts, without immediately reacting to them, is already a form of calm? Not a complete silence, not a perfect stillness, but a different kind of space. A space where you are not completely pulled by every thought that appears. And maybe that space is what you've been looking for. Not the absence of thoughts, but the ability to stay with yourself even when thoughts are present. That realization doesn't solve everything. Your mind doesn't suddenly become quiet. The thoughts don't completely disappear. But something changes. There's a small distance now, a small pause between the thought and your reaction. And in that pause, something important begins to grow. Not control, not silence, but the possibility of something different. That small pause begins to change something inside you, not all at once, and not in a way that feels dramatic or obvious, but slowly, almost quietly, as if something has shifted just enough for you to notice. The thoughts are still there, and your mind still moves the way it always has, but the experience of it begins to feel different. You are no longer completely inside every thought that appears. You begin to see them as they are, not as something you must follow, but as something that simply comes and goes. At first, this feels unfamiliar. You might still get pulled in without realizing it, and you might still find yourself lost in a chain of thoughts that feels endless. But now something else is possible. You can notice when it happens. You can see the moment when a thought begins, and you can see the moment when you start to follow it. And sometimes, just noticing that is enough to change the direction. Not by force and not by control, but by awareness. This awareness does not stop your mind from thinking. It does not silence everything, but it creates space, a small, quiet space between you and what is happening inside you. And in that space, something begins to feel lighter. Not because everything has been solved, and not because your life has suddenly become simple, but because you are no longer holding on to every thought as if it defines you. You begin to understand something that was not clear before. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is not a perfect stillness where nothing ever moves. Because if that were true, it would be almost impossible to reach. Your mind was never meant to be completely silent. It was never meant to stop thinking entirely. But maybe that was never the goal. Maybe the idea of peace was misunderstood. Maybe it was not something you had to create. Maybe it was something that already existed, but was hidden beneath everything you were trying to control. When you stop trying to force silence, something interesting happens. The pressure begins to fade. The need to fix everything begins to loosen. And in that moment, without trying too hard, you start to feel a different kind of calm. Not perfect, not complete, but real. A calm that exists even when thoughts are still present. A calm that does not depend on everything being quiet. A calm that allows things to be exactly as they are, without immediately needing to change them. And maybe that is what you were searching for all along. Not a mind without thoughts, but a way of being that is not disturbed by them. You sit there for a moment longer. The same place, the same environment, the same night, but something feels different. Not outside, but inside. The thoughts still come and go. Some are light, some are heavy, some try to pull your attention away. But you are not as easily taken by them anymore. You can stay where you are. You can remain present, even when your mind is moving. And that changes everything, even if it looks like nothing has changed at all. Because now, the quiet you were looking for does not feel so far away. It is not something you need to chase. It is not something that only exists in perfect conditions. It is something that can appear in the middle of everything, in the middle of noise, in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of your thoughts. You begin to realize that peace was never about controlling your mind. It was about understanding it. It was about seeing it clearly, without immediately reacting to everything it produces. And once you see it that way, something softens. Something opens. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for you to feel that you are no longer fighting yourself. Enough for you to feel that maybe, just maybe, things are not as chaotic as they once seemed. So tonight, if your mind feels restless, if your thoughts keep moving even when everything around you is still, that's okay. You don't need to stop them. You don't need to control them. You don't need to find a perfect state of silence. You only need to notice. Notice when a thought appears. Notice when you begin to follow it. Notice when you can gently step back, even for a moment. Because in that moment, something important is already happening. You are creating space. You are allowing yourself to exist without being pulled in every direction at once. And maybe that is enough for now. Maybe that is where peace begins. Not in perfection, not in silence, but in awareness. And if you can stay there, even briefly, even imperfectly, then you are already closer than you think. See you in the next story.